Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of HR Heretics. Today, we have Andrew Bartlow with us. Andrew is a multi time VP of HR, head of people. He's been at big companies, he's been at small companies across multiple types of companies VC, private equity, public. He now leads a People Accelerator and is a solopreneur and consultant. Andrew, thanks so much for being on the show. We're stoked to have you.
Hey, likewise. I'm a fanboy of HR Heretics. Thanks for having me.
We have one, Nolan. We have one.
I should also tell the audience, Kelly's not feeling well, but she is a trooper and is here today.
Dedication at its finest. All Nolan does not have a new host. It is me. It is me.
She's showing up to work. All right. So as I mentioned in the lead-in, Andrew, you have experience across venture, across private equity, and across public companies. What are the differences working at each of those different types of companies?
Sure. And hey, it might be helpful. Check out my LinkedIn profile. You can see the whole career journey. I'll try to give like a very, very quick nickel tour of like, all right, so what type of experience do I have? So 25-ish years in-house at companies from Fortune 100 to less than 100 employees. I think my first top job, I was 23 at a startup that I took from 20 to 120 to zero. Since then, I've been an angel, a LP, and actually a startup founder. I have my own B2B SaaS product that I continue to send money into and get no money out, doing the true founder journey. I'm an operating partner and advisor for a mid-market private equity company. And I've spent decades at enterprise organizations and at mid-market organizations. So I've got the VC, do a bunch of advising and mentoring, and worked in VC-backed companies. I've got the PE where I've worked in them 3-4 times, and now I'm a PE operating partner. And then I've got the public company experience from decades at places like Pepsi and GE and Wells Fargo and you name it. All right, so maybe that was more than a nickel. What was the question again? What's different about the three?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is stage of maturity, where there are different needs for different seasons. So if you're in high growth startup, chances are you are really focused on product market fit and building your company, the infrastructure and recruitment and building a team. Like it is the classic hockey stick where you're hoping to figure that out. That's a different pace. Those are different movements than if you're at the other end of the spectrum. Let's say you're a mature public company that's been in business for decades and been public for decades. The founders are probably no longer involved. You've got big public investors, mutual fund companies. You have a professional management team that has been trained at a bunch of different places. And it's an optimization exercise. You're trying to eke out or maintain your existing profitability. It's no longer the build, it's the optimize. And then in between is PE. And PE can take a couple of different flavors of a value creation plan. So, and we can talk more about this. I hope we do. Like PE could be a turnaround environment where maybe you're bloated and unprofitable and you need to fix it. Or you're a Kodak and you're being taken over by the digital age and you need to totally change what's going on. It could be a professionalization. It could be a founder moving on, or there's a handing over the keys to the next generation, and that's a different value creation plan. It could also be a growth story where maybe your company's not prepped to go IPO. Maybe that doesn't make sense for your size, and you just want to get some growth capital. And that could be an M&A story. It could be organic growth. I've worked on both. So I think there are kind of 3 or 4 classic value creation strategies in PE, and that can get really interesting. So it's each one of those is different, from venture on one end to public company on the extreme other, and then a couple of different flavors of ice cream in the middle, which is PE.
Yeah. It might be a generalization, Andrew, but if you're any business leader, do you have certain like personality characteristics or things that people like or don't like, or that they're good at or they're not good at, or that they care about or they don't care about? Like, how do I choose PE, public or private venture?
Um, I think a lot of it has to do with your prior experience, with your desires, with what are you good at, with understanding what you're getting into. You know, if you've only been at Walmart and you're thinking about jumping into a 100 person, Series B super hot startup, that is a massively different environment. So do you really want to do that? Are you sure you want to do that? Like the work is different. The players are different as well. The power structure is different, and the behaviors might be different. So I think there's a large element of self-reflection about what do I want to do and what am I good at as you change contexts. And I don't think there are a whole lot of us like me that have been in all three and have had arguably decent success in all three. Um, and maybe some of that was that I got those experiences early, so I could keep building on them. And even if I skinned my knee 20 years ago, I learned. I learned from it, and I did a little better the second, third, and fourth time around.
It's a really interesting take. Or you said power structure,
Yeah.
and there was a tweet over the weekend where someone said, not only does company culture change depending on how the company is funded, but also like the way that the company operates. So, for example, like if you're a venture-backed tech company, we're thinking about future profits. We're not thinking about massive profits today. And so the way that you operate is just like we're growing, and all we're thinking about is growth. Versus, if you're a public company or private equity backed company, profits are the thing that matters for the most part.
Yep.
And so that
Yep.
trickles down into the culture and into the operators. I'm curious, have you experienced that? And is that one of the things that you realized working across all of these different company types?
This might be my golden nugget for our conversation. The power structure, how decisions are made, who your stakeholders are, and what they care about really matters in your organization. So let's work through it a little bit. Maybe I can give a tangible example. So in a startup, early stage, founders are typically still involved. We're talking Series ABC. They're certainly still involved. As you get successive rounds of funding, you are selling off 10 to 20% of the company at each round of fundraising. Could be more. Like times are tough right now. So by the time you get to Series B, certainly C, your founder or founders probably no longer have full decision-making control over their organization. They could, in theory, be Travis Kalanick, Bill Gurley, voted out of their own company. We're talking about Uber. Now that very, very rarely happens because of the incentives set up in venture capital, where if you get to be known for displacing your founders, nobody's going to want your money. Nobody's going to want your investment anymore, right? So it's possible, but it's super rare. So generally what I'm saying is in VC, the founder's view drives things. The founder is the driver, the visionary, the executor. They make the company go, and they are almost never, the plug is almost never pulled on them. It's up to them. On the other far end of the spectrum is the public company. And you're right, it's about profit, it's about optimization, it's about quarterly earnings. And even though we talk about long term, and Warren Buffett looks at GE and Coca-Cola over decades, he actually doesn't. Like he'll sell off those companies if things aren't looking good over a couple of quarters. So it's a fairly short cycle in public companies. Um, the investors matter a lot more in public companies. You can change out board members. You can certainly change out executive team members, pretty quickly, including CEOs. CEO turnover is relatively high at public companies. It's as high as any other professional job. We could dig up some stats on that. In the middle with PE, again, it's kind of a blend where there's some incentives where if you're a family owned business that the founder's involved, if a PE company has a reputation for displacing the founder, you might not want their money, right? But there are different incentives involved. The PE firm that I work with only does control investments. So they have at least 51% of the voting shares and they can displace, but they avoid it. They really consciously try to avoid it, not just because of the next investment, but because it's like massively disruptive. Like you really want it to work with the executive team and the founders and the people that are there. But it doesn't always work. Like it depends what's going on. If you're at a growth strategy PE firm, then you might need people that have been through the growth process, that have been there, done that, and have seen things at 2, 3, 4x where they are today. Some companies get scooped up by PE as their financial saviors, where they're losing money, there's massive burn, they can't go IPO. Like sadly, I think we're seeing more of that in venture-backed tech, where there isn't another round of funding and they get scooped up by some PE, and then they go make the tough decisions that those founders were unwilling to make. So yes, it comes back. This is a very long answer. It comes back to your stakeholders, what their interests are, and I think once again, the founders have a ton of control in VC-backed companies. The investors have the massive amount of control in public companies, and PE's somewhere in the middle with some different strains or flavors of that based off of what the situation of the company and the strategy, the value creation plan of the PE firm is.
Talk to me about when you come in because you're an advisor, and specifically for a private equity firm. And so when you come in and you do a talent assessment for a new investment, what does that look like?
Yeah. The way I do it, there are a couple of variations. The firm that I work with primarily tends to go light on the formal assessment methodologies, meaning we don't do a Hogan, we don't do a Wonderlic, we don't do a disc profile, the psychometric assessments. There's a feeling that that's like too heavyweight and it creates this pseudo academic distancing. Instead, what I do is I go in and I talk to people. I usually don't fly around. It's usually over a video conference, much like this. I'll spend an hour with all the key people, and often a heck of a lot more than that. Might be 2, 3, 4 follow-ups with a founder or the sales leader or a key member of the team to understand what are you looking for out of this investment? What are your expectations? What do you want to make sure happens or doesn't happen to maximize or optimize the outcomes of this investment? So I'll have these conversations, and I'll do that in a pretty straightforward, friendly way, because the deal hasn't happened yet. It's diligence, so there's still some
Oh, so
element.
you're coming in during the diligence phase and
Yeah,
doing this.
yeah.
Got it.
I'm
Okay.
almost always coming in for the first time during diligence before the deal has closed, where the current owners of the company could still pull out or still choose another investor. So there's some element of getting to know each other and building trust and identifying what that value creation plan actually is, and you want to hear it from the people. And I don't mean every person. I can't talk to hundreds or thousands of people in some of these companies, but you usually go at least one layer down from the CEO, sometimes two. It could be a dozen or a couple of dozen conversations, and that pulls out some themes of what that group identifies that they need. Now, I put that through the filter of almost 30 years doing this work and having seen lots of different companies go through whatever journey they're planning to go through. So maybe it's M&A fueled growth. Maybe it's a bunch of organic new greenfield, sites that are opening up. Maybe it's, could be a lot of different things. And so I put it through my filter of, is what they think they need, how well does that match up with what I think they need and with what I'm hearing from the investors, with what their anticipation and their assumptions are about what the value creation plan is. And then I'll call out where that might be the same or that might be different. And so I'll put together a anticipated or proposed future state org chart. I'll go that far, even during diligence, to say, like, hey, I think you probably want to add a chief revenue officer. Person that you have running it is great. They got you to this stage. You don't necessarily need to let that person go, but you might want to put somebody in that has seen massive business expansion and led a big team before. I might make that proposal, and then assuming the investment happens, the leadership team and the investor can make a decision whether or not to do that, and if so, when. But I'll make my third-party informed but disinterested. I guess I'm interested to an extent because I'm an investor in the fund. Make my recommendation as to what it would take to get the value creation that they hope to get out of it. And I'll pull together a report that might be 15, 20 pages long. I'll have some red, yellow, green on existing leadership team with some commentary. I'll have a current and future state org chart. I'll have suggested roles to fill, suggested sequencing, estimated cost. I'll also do some analysis of what they look like to the outside world. So I'll go on LinkedIn and Glassdoor and all the social media places and see if anything odd pops up. One company, I found a bunch of fake reviews that they had obviously dropped in themselves. So I flagged that and said, we should probably look into this. What's going on? So I talk to the people. I take a look to see whatever might be publicly available to the outside world, and I make some suggestions about how to get this organization to where it can create the value that the PE firm wants to find out of it. But I don't make those final calls. I just make those recommendations.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Real talk, most talent leaders haven't yet cracked how to leverage AI for meaningful impact on their hiring processes and business goals. But the leaders who are effectively using AI to transform their recruiting team's efficiency and quality use Metaview. Metaview is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations, like intakes, interviews, and debriefs, then provides perfectly summarized notes of everything that was discussed. That means your people can focus on creating human connections with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. But it's so much more than just a time saver, because perfect notes means perfect data. For every candidate in every pipeline, hiring teams can make confident, informed decisions, and talent leaders can finally take control of the interview process. Join forward-thinking talent leaders at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Quora, and check out Metaview. Head over to metaviewai/heretics to talk to one of Metaview's product experts, or get started for free. You'll be up, running, and AI-enabled in minutes.
Here's a crazy stat. Between hybrid and frontline employees, about 80% don't typically work in an office. So it's no surprise that digitally engaging employees is the #1 concern for CEOs as companies go hybrid. But as hybrid is quickly becoming the norm, it's easy for workplaces to start feeling a little less human. Yet delighting a digital workforce is possible, and it can even be, dare we say, fun. That's where Workvivo, Zoom's employee experience platform, comes in. If you've ever recoiled at the thought of a static intranet that looks like something you built in 1995 using MS Paint, have no fear. Workvivo is a dynamic, intuitive, accessible, and mobile-first tool. People actually like using it, which is why companies like Ryanair, Dollar General, Virgin, and more have rolled it out to hundreds of thousands of employees. Workvivo's activity feeds, spaces, shoutouts, and live streams, among other features, help elevate the employee experience like never before. The result? Dramatically better retention, productivity, and most importantly, connectedness. A greater sense of the belonging we all crave at work, whether we sit at a desk or drive a truck. Make Workvivo the digital heart of your organization and achieve limitless human connection. Head to workvivo.com to book a demo and make sure you tell them that Nolan and Kelli from HR Heretics sent you.
Andrew, I'm curious, what are the biggest questions you get from the founders? Like, what do they ask you the most about the firm or the transaction? And, what are their biggest concerns?
Yeah, well, there's usually some degree of skepticism of like, hey, we've heard, but PE doesn't have the best reputation in the world. And so I get to share my personal story of having worked at 3, maybe 4, depending how you count the iterations of PE-backed firms that were all bad experiences. The internal experiences that I had were like, as head of HR for what went on to become Invitation Homes. We had a number of private equity sponsors in and out over the years, and there was a lot of financial engineering. There wasn't a lot of management consulting support. It was like the smartest guy in the room would come in and like tell you something unkindly and not really listen to what your plan was to build the business. I get to tell my story of my experience with the firm that I work with, who come from a management consulting backgrounds. That many of them come from Bain, and so they actively look at organizations where they think they can add unique value through building a management team and building some level of structure and process. And that's why my role exists at all. It's because we think it can be helpful. And so I share, hey, I get it, bad rep, but that's not these guys. This group, and I think I'm an example, I'm having this conversation with you, founder, and your team to figure out how we can help and how we can make sure that we don't screw it up along the way. We want to hear from you. So their initial question, or the question behind the question, is, hey, what will this relationship really look like? If I'm giving up control of my organization, what does that mean for me? And will it be in good hands? And will we be partners, or will you be my investor overlords? And that's something that can be really challenging for owners and founders, or the kids of founders, to sort through.
As somebody who grew up in VC, I've been hanging out with more private equity people recently. And I think one of the misnomers around private equity is once an investment is made, the management team gets fired and replaced with a new management team. And what I've been, as I've been talking to and making more friends in private equity and learning how that actually operates, their biggest desire, as they've told me, is to not do that, because that is incredibly disruptive to the business. Like,
Agreed.
They want to keep the management team in place, but some of the problems that exist is like, hey, we've just put this massive investment in. Oftentimes it comes with a liquidity event for the founder or the entire management team, and they may not be as motivated to keep working. And so that's actually like one of the reasons why. And I think, again, this misnomer has been perpetuated, but it's not necessarily true. But there are cases when you come in and you say, this person is not the right fit for what we need going forward, given where we want to take the company.
Yep.
How do you think about the second order of that? Of like, we just put in a new investment. Now we're ripping out either the founder or the executive. How does that team then like trust the investors to move forward? Like, what does that process look like?
Yeah, I think it starts with that openness and that partnership. And hey, if let's use the example of, you have a founder owner or founder group that has had an exit where they're still involved with the business, but the PE firm now has control. You would do everything you can to retain that founder leader, because they know how this worked. They got it to where it is, and they want to be with you on the next stage of the journey. So usually they're rolling in some form of equity into the deal. So they'll get a significant payout, and then they'll have, golden handcuffs, some form of LTI on the next exit. So how do you deal with the potential for change? It's having those direct conversations about, we made this investment at you here. Our plan together is to get you to whatever it is, 4x in the next 3 to 7 years, 4x valuation. We think we can do that through a combination of mergers and acquisitions, multiple expansion, expanded distribute, like whatever it is, whatever the plan is. And then the question is, what's it going to take to get there? And we want the operators to operate. We want the leaders to make the decisions. The investors will bring resources and support where you can be better informed. And you'll have access to resources like me that, a founder-led company would never know who I am, would never know who my peers are, and probably wouldn't make the choice to spend, the capital to get that input. So, potentially long way of saying, you have the conversation directly with the leader, and you put your map together, almost like a product roadmap. You have your talent map of what do we think it will take, what's the sequencing as well, to get to where we want to be. And if you're doing it right as the investor, you're not jumping in over the top of the CEO owner and saying you must do this, you must do that, because then that, just like you said, Nolan, the founder, former owner, CEO decides it's not for them anymore, and they've got the FU money, and they can walk away if they want to. So it's I wouldn't say it's totally dispassionate. I wouldn't say it's totally unemotional, because there's actually a lot of fear in disruption. Like, if anything, there's fear from the investor of, like, we don't want to screw this up. We don't want to disrupt things by pulling people out, that there are relationships and there is a track record. So if anything, the investor is often adding resources or really encouraging some incremental investment. And then it's up to the leader to decide, okay, well, do we continue to need some of the people that are in here, or am I seeing the value? And usually the first hire is a CFO. The CFO to do where usually they've never really had a professional CFO, and there's a lot more reporting and a lot more analysis, and they start to see the value of that, and they're more willing to hire a professional HR leader, or they're more willing to hire a chief of staff to handle the value creation plan.
I think it's a really good point about the disruption. And we've talked to this, in other episodes, Nolan, but even if the company isn't doing that great, right? Even if it's mediocre or yellow, in the spirit of red, yellow, and green, often it's a mistake to make a bunch of changes and think it's going to go to green. Usually goes to red pretty quickly if you change it too much, even if it is yellow. So I do appreciate that.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
There's a world where your CRM is powerful, easily configured, and deeply intuitive. Attio makes that a reality. Attio is a radically new CRM built specifically for the new era of companies. It's flexible, easily configures to your unique data structures, works for any go-to-market motion from self-serve to sales-led. Attio automatically enriches your contacts, syncs your emails and calendar, lets you create powerful reports, and quickly build Zapier-style automations. The next era of companies deserves more than a one-size-fits-all CRM with an outdated UX. Join 11 labs, replicate, modal, and more. Try Attio instantly at attio.com. That's ATTIO.com, and tell them Nolan and Kelly from HR Heretics sent you.
This episode is brought to you by Warp. If you're a founder with employees in multiple states, you know managing state tax compliance is complicated. Warp not only automates state tax compliance, but also offers a user-friendly experience tailored to the needs of startups with a robust in-house team of experts. Warp ensures your startup remains compliant across all 50 states, giving you the peace of mind you need to focus on scaling your business. They also make it easy for startups to provide health benefits for employees, hire international contractors, and even claim R&D tax credits. Hundreds of startups trust Warp to handle their payroll and compliance needs. You can go from zero to payroll live in just 2 days. Don't let payroll and compliance hold your startup back. Visit joinwarp.com/peel or tap the link in the description. Get started and receive a $1,000 gift card when you run your very first payroll. That's joinwarp.com/peel.
I feel like I've talked to a few PE firms recently, and I love both of your takes on this. I feel like they're trying to actively change a bit of the rap they've gotten over the years of being the Grim Reaper that's evil and fires everybody and takes control. And I've heard for the first time in years them actively bringing that up in conversations unsolicited, that they're trying to do things differently. To your earlier point of we're different, we're not like that. I mean, are you both seeing that out there?
Yeah, I can start. So I went to Capital Camp last year, and it's a very large PE distribution of folks that go there. And this was the thing that I was asking. Is just like, hey, like, why do you guys do this? And I think what I had heard from folks is it used to be how the business primarily operated, and that's why like the rap sheet like came about. But nowadays, like, they've seen the second order effects of when they leave founders in place and when they displace founders and or executive teams. And it's so much better to have the founder in place because they have not only all the relationships, but all the context on the business. And so I think it did happen in the past, but I think it's changing. That's what I've seen. Andrew, what have you seen?
Yeah, I think there are some influences about the broader macro environment. So yeah, I think there's broader awareness that your reputation matters. That, you know, if and when there is choice, you'll choose a capital partner that's more likely to work with you. There's not always choice. And so when I talk about the macro environment, if we have venture-backed technology startups that are still burning, no matter how much they're cutting, at some point they're going to have to either close the doors or get investment somewhere. So I think that it's wise for PE firms to manage their reputation. I also think that there will be a lot of scoops coming up over the upcoming few years, meaning there will be some PE firms that go in and scoop up some intellectual property from some failing venture-backed PE, some PE firms that scoop up some failing venture-backed tech companies' IP. That will likely lay off all the people and merge together a couple of businesses. So I'd be shocked if I didn't see some of that happen. That's not the sort of work that I do. The firm that I do most of my work with doesn't get involved in tech at all, which is really funny for me. I have a foot firmly planted in venture-backed tech and a foot firmly planted in, you know, air quote, real companies. Yeah, so I think there's awareness of relationship. But I think that relationship or that reputation will get stressed over the next couple of years as we see the fallout from the current macro cycle.
Yep. Let's transition a bit and talk about the CEO and chief people officer or head of people relationship. And I'm really interested in examples of where you've seen these relationships not go well and what you've learned about those.
Situations where the relationship hasn't gone well, I can speak both firsthand. I've been in enough jobs where I've stubbed my toe and, you know, had some bruised relationships, as well as from some without naming names. I've mentored, I don't know, 100+ HR leaders at this point, either one-on-one or through People Leader Accelerator. I think a strong theme is where there's misalignment of expectations. And let's peel that apart a little bit. So misalignment of expectations might be, and, you know, this, you know, here's a personal anecdote. One of my first top jobs, I interviewed with the CEO founder and I asked what he wanted out of HR. And this leader said, I want you to keep me out of trouble. I want you to keep us out of jail. It's like, oh, that's not what I wanted. That's the wrong answer. That's not what I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear how HR is a strategic function and will help us meet our goals, and how we can do all these, you know, wonderful things to add value to the organization and the employee base. And I took the job anyway. It ended up leading to my first public company CHRO job, and that founder ended up exiting the business with a ownership change, and I continued on through several. So I outlasted the founder in that case. But while we have a cordial and continuing relationship, there was always some friction. Like he was always trying to get shit done, and he never really wanted to bring anybody in close to give suggestions and advice about how to do things. And I wanted nothing more than to be that consigliere, than to be close, than to be helpful and useful. And so we always had a little bit of tension in terms of why is Andrew not stay in his lane? Like just do these traditional people ops and recruiting things. Why's he got to act like the COO and weigh in on all this stuff? Like there's always a little bit of tension there. So that's an example of where it doesn't necessarily go that well. And would he hire me again? I don't know. Probably not. Would I work for him again? Probably not. But it was the right move for me at that point in my career, like my first, what turned into my first public company HR gig, and that really helped make my career and allowed me to go independent and do all this good stuff. Maybe to expand on the example, where does it go wrong? If the HR leader is trying to do things that the business leader, CEO doesn't get, doesn't connect with, doesn't value, that's where you never really have a true relationship. You're a service provider. You get relegated. You get put out on HR island. And frankly, a lot of HR people do that to themselves. We work on HR stuff rather than the key business stuff. Like we don't take the time to really understand what is this organization trying to accomplish. I know, Kelly, you and I have talked a little bit about this. Yeah.
For sure. I mean, Andrew, what is the best way that we can assess that of a CEO or a CEO founder in the process?
How they see us, like how they want us to be involved.
Yep.
I mentioned I'm a fanboy, right? So I listen to every minute of your episodes, and I think Jeff Diana just killed it as he talked about spending time with CEO founders. Like if they're willing to engage and willing to go deep and willing to have that second, third, fourth conversation about the business and talk about how you would handle certain situations. Or LJ, as he talked about, get to that point of fatality as soon as possible. I'd suggest, especially if you're senior in your career and you have some choices. I'm fortunate enough at this point, but again, I think, Kelly, you said this well, not everybody does. Some people are still trying to make it in their career. Try to get to that point of fatality during the interview process. Like try to get to that crossroads of like, hey, this is a real decision point. Are we going to work well together or are we not? And let's make a good mutual decision. I think that's how you can assess it early on. And to expand on the idea of choices are different at different stages, I was willing to take that riskier, likely tension-filled relationship to get to that next level of my career, to get the public company CHRO job. And I slogged it out and I wrestled with it. And I was worried I'd get fired many days. And he probably thought about firing me many days. But it ended up working out and the company ended up doing really well and I continued on. And so I think there is something about being willing to take on risk, being willing to take on non-perfect situations.
Life is about trade-offs, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's a perfect example of one. I want to go back to HR Island.
Yeah.
I love that phrase, and I think it deeply resonates with me and mistakes that I've made in my career, which is working on things that I think are most important for the business without having alignment with the CEO.
Yep.
And I often feel like when you're operating inside of a business, you just get to these relationships to where it's like, oh, like yeah, Nolan, but I don't know. Like, I don't know if we should do that. And then I'm doing everything I can to try and convince the CEO. And I just like can't get over that hump of convincing them. And so I end up like wanting to do it and I end up doing it, and then it ends up costing relationship capital
Yeah.
because the CEO wanted me to focus on something else. How do you advise HR leaders who can see the like car crash coming
Yeah.
and want to focus on something else, but the CEO is pushing them in the other direction?
I usually start with, and this might be non-intuitive, asking the HR leader to take a second and third look at their own motivations and their own judgment here. Like if the CEO is pushing you in a different direction, why is that? Like what is not resonating? It's not necessarily that you need to sell harder or say it differently. Like what's going on there? And I'll be direct. It's usually that the HR person is pushing a air quote best practice. It's usually that there's a playbook that they're trying to roll out or a best practice that they like to do or think would be useful that may not be the most important thing to that leader right now. And that connection hasn't been made. We lean far too often, I include myself on this, in it's the right thing to do, or I know this will work, or here's some very generalized statistics about the correlation of employee engagement to productivity. Well, who cares if your product roadmap is off track or you're not making your ARR growth numbers? Like you don't need a lot of these nice to have programs that we often come to the table with if some core business metrics aren't coming together.
I was
And
talking to
that's
someone.
usually where there's a mismatch.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody the other day, and they're like, "Well, our engagement scores are 90 something percent. Our HR team is crushing it, like dancing, skipping around, and like, yeah, revenue's in the shit toilet. So what are you
Doesn't
doing?
matter.
Doesn't
Right.
matter.
Nothing matters.
Doesn't matter.
And these goals that I think we've always, well, not always, but I myself too, 20 years ago, we've put these things as the end. They are the goal, and they're not. They are
Yeah.
a means to a goal. Obviously, happy employees help revenue and create happy customers, but they are not the end in itself. And I think that is something that is changing.
Yeah, compare that to another functions numbers. Like let's say that you are in digital marketing and you are trying to optimize for conversion and you want to get as close to 100% customer conversion as possible. Well, you set up these like awkward filters where if you get through the filters, you're going to convert. Is that actually increasing revenue or not? Like what you're trying to do is optimize for the true bottom line end result for the business.
Yeah.
And I think we've gotten stuck as a function too often on some of these secondary indicators.
That's
Like
right.
we've set up these people indicators separate and apart from the core business metrics that we should be trying to drive. And we would benefit ourselves and our organizations and our relationships with our CEO founders much more if we started with what is the business outcome that we're trying to
Yeah.
drive. And that's not engagement. Engagement is not what we're trying to drive.
That's right.
We're trying to optimize engagement, not maximize it.
Yes. And that's how it gets to the island, Nolan. Like, do not
Yeah.
make it an island, make it a pit stop on the way to the end goal, which is the business metrics. And I'll go back to episode 1 with Patty. I mean, she said it back in October. Like, what are your HR metrics? How do you know you're successful? It's the same metrics in the company the business leaders have.
Yeah. So, do you think HR leaders over-index on engagement?
Oh yeah. Oh heck yeah. Of course we do. Just like recruiters, no offense intended, Nolan, over-index on filling jobs,
Totally.
right? Like so what's time to fill, butts and seats, employee engagement, employee satisfaction, attrition. These are secondary and tertiary metrics. What really matters is, are we hitting our revenue goals? Are we building our company? Are we hitting our profitability goals if you're a public company or a PE firm? Are we tracking along to our value creation plan if you're a PE backed firm? And sometimes engagement or hiring is part of that, but let's not get lost about the connections. Yeah, and maybe, here's maybe a spicy take. The reason that we get stuck on some of these secondary metrics, one is we as a function don't have as much business grounding as many CFOs and COOs do. Like we come from the world of project management or recruiting or office management rather than MBAs. So we don't have the foundational business grounding as commonly. Two, there are a lot of HR, I blame the hiring managers. I blame the CEOs. There are a lot of HR leaders that are hired from recruiting manager leaders, or that are mid-level HR practitioners that overnight become heads of HR or VPs of HR. And you haven't had the benefit of multiple cycles in the top job. Kelli, you've done it multiple times. I've done it multiple times. There's something different if you've been there, done that. In terms of understanding how it fits together versus executing on the plan. Like designing the plan versus executing on the plan. If you're executing on it, your visibility might be to those secondary metrics. If you're building the plan, your visibility is on the primary metrics like revenue. I don't know if that resonates or not.
It does. Another thing I've seen though is, we run these engagement surveys now. Some companies are running them 2 or 4 times a year. And you put this number out and the number is not getting better. And oftentimes the number is like getting worse and it looks like lower engagement. And so what you want to do, the human nature is like, this number is attached to me. I want to make that number go up. And so I've come to this is my take on this, and people vehemently disagree with me. I think engagement is a bullshit metric. Like, I don't know why we do it as much as we do. I don't know why we set the expectations that we do with engagement. That like, hey, like we're going to run this survey and then the number comes back bad and then we don't do anything about it. It's like we miscalibrate with employees. We miscalibrate with our boss, who's the CEO. Like, why do we do this? I don't understand it at all.
I will tell you, and here comes the heretics, that
Yeah.
we do it because everyone else fucking does it. And we were trained to do it. And I will tell you, 24 years ago, I was trained that these secondary metrics that we're all shitting on are the metrics. I was doing time to fill. I was grabbing these things very strongly. We were trained to do these things. That is why. And that is why you hear playbook, best practice. Everyone's throwing up on these terms now. And now, I also don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, playbooks are all terrible, because that's bullshit. Like, some things actually work. And so I don't want to swing the pendulum too far, but that's what's going on here, Nolan. And now you're probably going to hear all these people, we hate engagement and we're the cool guys. But I do think there is some value in some barometer, though. Like, if it's bright red or bright green, like there's something going on there. If it comes out in the wash, like whatever. But there's some value and some barometer, I think, especially at the bookends. And maybe I hate the term engagement. Maybe it's called something else. Like we talked about this.
Yeah,
work trials. But,
well, yeah, you're right. I hate the term for sure. But I think the other piece that you spurred a thought for me is around the expectation setting. Like, we're not going to set the people roadmap based off the engagement survey.
There you go. How are you deciding what to do as an HR leader? So
yes.
I don't know if I stole this for somebody or made up this quote. One of the most important roles of a leader is deciding what you and your team will work on. That is the definition of strategy. What will we work on? Well, what are our goals? And then the tactics is following from that. And if you're just getting yanked around by frontline employees who want to get paid more, you're going to have more programs. You're going to have more time off. You're going to have more and more stuff that might not be directly connected to driving business value. Maybe it is, but often it's not. And so, like, who are you listening to decide what to do? And if you can't draw from your own experience And if we have lots of people that are in the job for the first time, and with the explosion of easy capital and lots of companies getting funded, lots of people were in the job for the first time and they were just doing their best. And the CEOs usually don't know what good HR looks like. CEOs usually don't know what good companies look like, especially if they're early career founders that are fresh Stanford dropouts that got funded, right? So they're trying to, craft their own journey. So, and then you hire an HR leader that doesn't necessarily know what good looks like either. So that's one of the reasons why I do People Leader Accelerators, try to help people get better grounded in what does good look like. And that way you can educate your CEO founder, rather than getting yanked around by whatever dinner they went to over the weekend and whatever best practice. Like I remember my CEO went to a dinner with Tony Hsieh from Zappos, and he wanted to implement holacracy on a Monday. I hate Mondays because the CEO would always come in with these wild ass ideas that I would have to burn capital to talk him out of.
Oh my God, that deeply resonates, by the way. Like I have lived that exact life where it's like, shit, what's going to happen on Monday? Like, who did he go to dinner with this weekend?
Yeah. Back to the engagement question, Kelli, I love that you bring the nuance to the discussion around engagement. Like, engagement can be useful, but it shouldn't be like the primary indicator. Like, think of it like a speedometer or an oil pressure in your car. Do we even have oil? I drive a Tesla. I don't know what dials are on cars anymore. Is an 82 good in engagement? Maybe. Like in the early days, engagement tends to be really strong. Usually you go through a J curve as you get funding and your leadership team changes. So as you get bigger, your initial builders are no longer as content. And so you go through this period of discontent, and then satisfaction starts to ramp back up. I find it's useful to track your own employee engagement over time and see if there's a big drop off from one year or one cycle to the next. See if there's a low spot in one function or one group than another, and then you can go intervene and do something about it. But the companies that I see engagement or ENPS be one of their big 5 company goals, I think that's bullshit. That's just irrelevant.
I just see so many companies, and not just HR leaders, all business leaders, we become so hyperbolic about these things, and it's just not. Like, they're not good, they're not bad, they're not left, they're not right. It's what's going on in the context of that business at that moment with that team, and how do you put it all together? And you said something a few minutes ago, Andrew, and I'm going to challenge it. And you said, well, we got this score. What is that HR leader going to do about it? And the first thing I fucking do about it is go into the C-suite and talk about it in the context of the greater puzzle of what's happening in the organization. Like, what if our engagement score is yellow or red, and we're crushing revenue goals, and our attrition numbers are extremely low? Like, what's going on there? Like, it doesn't mean we go roll out like pinball machines and fucking kegs. Like, what that's something odd. That's something different. And your same example around comp, like, we start with, let's educate what we're doing. Let's not create new stuff. Let's actually talk about what we're doing first. And so we can jump to these conclusions very quickly and take action that usually isn't the bullseye of what's happening.
And it's usually this massive, drawn out, bureaucratic administrative exercise where every group does their own analysis and readout, and everybody has their own action plan.
Totally.
And like, what's actually useful? Yeah. It's something much simpler and more streamlined usually.
And they ship the action plan 4 months later.
Oh my God!
It's time for the next survey.
But that's
and the survey is anonymous, so you don't actually know who said what, and you can't go do something about it. I mentioned my own little SaaS startup. That's one of the things I think is fundamental. You have to have attributable feedback.
Yes.
So like, who needs help? Yeah. If you can't raise your own hand, if you're not willing to raise your own hand to say you want to have a conversation or I need help, then you don't deserve help.
Totally.
Yeah, or don't throw it in a survey if you're worried about attribution coming back to you in retribution. Like, go have another conversation.
At that point, the relationship's broken anyway, and you'd probably be better off voting with your feet if you're unwilling to ask for help at that point.
That's well said. You guys have just like banged on all of like my core issues here. So, audience, we would love to hear like other views of this as to like why you run your people team roadmap based off of the engagement survey. I can't understand it for the life of me, but like we are open to other ideas.
We should call this episode Survey Says, like Family,
Yeah.
Family Feud.
Survey says engagement surveys blow. Okay, so Andrew, you had a hot take on LinkedIn.
I have a few. I've had a few hot takes on LinkedIn.
I like
that's
it.
For sure. Spicy.
I appreciate that if you couldn't tell. One of those takes is that HR leaders shouldn't make as much as their peers. Why do you believe that?
All right. So you're calling me out on my clickbait headline on
That's what
LinkedIn.
he does. That's what he does. It's brilliant. We knew it was coming.
So a spicy headline, and all right, I'll stand by it. Most HR leaders don't act like executives, don't act like broad-based business executives for all the reasons that we just talked about, right? You're focused on secondary metrics. You're not really as closely connected to the business outcomes as you could and should be. And if you're not acting like a broad-based business executive, you might have the title, you might sit in the executive team meeting, but you're probably not being treated or paid like one, and you shouldn't be. So it's up to us. It's up to us to work on the right stuff. And so, I sometimes blame the hiring managers, like the CEOs don't know what good looks like, so they don't necessarily hire the HR leader that they need or partner with them in the way that would be most beneficial. But it's also on us to educate ourselves, to find our resources and our mentors. And I know Kelli mentors people, and listening to HR Heretics is a great way to ramp up in terms of what good looks like. But figure out what good looks like and get there, and then you'll earn the credibility and the pay and the title and the influence that comes with being a broad-based business executive. So that's a bunch of walk back, Nolan, on a spicy headline that I still believe in, but it's for I think reasonable reasons.
Just to further that point, executives are an N of one market. LJ actually said this in the Coinbase episode, and I've been thinking a lot about it. And I think the intent of driving pay parity amongst executives is well intended, but I don't think that level of quote unquote like fairness actually makes any sense, because you could think of like a CRO, for example, who's literally in charge of driving the revenue for the business, having an on-target earning that's much higher than anyone else at the exec level. Like, it makes total sense. It's aligned. You can imagine a CFO who is in very high demand for that type of business that has more equity than anyone else. It's just, I think execs are an N of one market, and I think there are cases in which like the desire to have pay parity clouds the business reality of what it takes to work with the best people for the job.
Agreed. There might be a scenario where your people or HR leader is the top paid.
Totally.
Maybe you're a B2B SaaS company that's selling to HR executives. You probably want some super heavyweight, well-known, esteemed leader that is wearing multiple hats, both leading your people function, advising a CEO, and has a big part of your go-to-market and product as well, even if they don't report in, lots of influence. But it depends on the role.
Yeah,
sure.
The range is extremely wide. I mean, this range is 300K plus or minus total cash comp a year. That range, not total,
it could go
the range
way high. Yeah, it could even be bigger, depending on the stage of the company. And again, it's by the role. Like, when you think about these in like, I think LJ just nailed it. Is like each executive is N of one. Like, they have all these people have their own markets. And this is where I think Netflix nailed it, and they take a lot of shit for not having pay parity. But the reality is when you get to like that upper echelon level, like your market is determined by your own market, not the rest of the market. And I'll go back to the Charlie Munger quote around executive compensation. One of the things Munger said was like, "I'd rather throw a viper down my shirt than bring in a comp consultant." And I think this is why, is like, there's so much nuance with each individual person that, as it relates to pay parity here, I don't think it actually exists at that level.
I don't know. I would take issue with Charlie's take there. Like, having been a comp consultant, having worked with comp consultants, let's talk about, well, hey, let's add like just a bit of nuance to that. We've talked about the relationship between an investor and a founder, and it's really disruptive to displace a founder or piss off a founder. And so it's helpful sometimes to have a third party, disinterested professional to come in and help figure out how somebody should be paid, right? So even if they're not coming up with some new answer, just removing the tension or reducing the tension from that dynamic can be worth whatever you're paying that consultant. And I think about that in any range of the scenarios, from public company to startup as well as PE backed. The relationship dynamics and the power dynamics really matter, and sometimes it can be helpful to have a third party come in and smooth it over.
I also think we've talked about this. You need a little bit of structure, a little bit of, bumper rails on the bowling lane. I mean, it can't just be individual by individual all over the place. So, but we can talk about that later, or we have talked about maybe before.
Yeah. Kelli, anything else from you?
No, this was wonderful, my friend. Thank you, Andrew, for coming today.
Thanks so much for having me. Hopefully this is useful. That's the point in my career that I'm at. I just want to be, my number one purpose is to try to help other HR people elevate. I've felt for a long time, for most of my career, that HR has been, I don't know, undervalued, and we can do better. And so People Leader Accelerator and the book and podcasts like this, I hope, are continuing to elevate the function as people figure out what good looks like.
Love that, Andrew. Thank you again for the time. HR Heretics is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Econ 102, Moment of Zen, and Turpentine VC. Subscribe, 5 stars, share it on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, all the things.